Thank God this incredible HFY masterpiece found you today. Witness the legend starting now. The interstellar concordance had been at peace for approximately 300 standard cycles, which was impressive considering that half the member species still thought eating with utensils was a bizarre affectation, and the other half considered tentacles perfectly acceptable appendages for a handshake. This piece, fragile as spun sugar and twice as likely to shatter at the first sign of moisture, was maintained through a delicate system of diplomatic training, cultural exchange programs, and the mutual understanding that music. Nobody really wanted to find out what would happen if the Krameg Armada decided to have a bad day. Enter Zenith Academy, jewel of the Concordance's educational initiative, perched on the neutral moon of Tersimia Music 7 like a gleaming monument to optimistic bureaucracy. The Academy trained the brightest young minds from across the galaxy in the subtle arts of diplomacy, conflict resolution, and how to insult someone in 47 languages while maintaining plausible deniability. Its crystalline music spires reached toward the violet sky, its halls hummed with translation matrices, and its cafeteria served approximately 200 music, different species dietary requirements with only a 15% cross-contamination rate, which was actually quite impressive. And GT, music. And GT, if you thought about it. The Academy operated on a peculiar social structure that would have given anthropologists migraines for decades. See, despite all the high-minded ideals about equality and mutual respect plastered across every orientation hologram, the student body had developed its own hierarchy. And because most of these students came from species where physical prowess equaled survival, music, and survival equaled status, the pecking order looked suspiciously like a food chain with better lighting and fewer actual fatalities, music. At the top of this chain sat the warrior castes, Corvaxians with their chitinous plates and redundant organ systems, Threxkai with their music, impressive musculature, and even more impressive egos, and the occasional Saurian whose species had been conquering things since before humanity figured out fire was useful for more than keeping warm. These students walked the halls like they owned them, which technically they didn't. But try telling that to someone who could bench press a small shuttle. In the middle clustered the moderates, species advanced enough to have left their death worlds behind, evolved past the nasty business of survival of the fittest, and developed philosophies that prioritized intellect over intimidation. They formed study groups, organized cultural events, and generally tried to pretend the top tier wasn't occasionally shaking down the bottom tier for lunch credits. And at the bottom, well, the bottom was where you found the species from nice, reasonable planets, where the most dangerous predator was something roughly equivalent to an irritated hamster. Sweet people generally, smart often, but about as threatening as a strongly worded letter, and everyone knew it. Then there was Kira Chen. Kira didn't music fit neatly into any category, which bothered people more than they cared to admit. She was human, earth-born, Sol system. That weird little backwater everyone had heard about, but nobody really understood. The kind of planet music that got a mention in xenobiology classes under improbable survival scenarios, and cautionary tales about atmospheric music composition. Her personnel file listed Earth as a Class 12 Deathworld, but that designation sat there like a footnote. Music nobody bothered to read, because really, how bad could it be? She stood barely 5 and 1/2 ft tall in her standard issue academy boots, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of unremarkable features that made her easy to overlook in a crowd of beings. Music, with tentacles, extra eyes, and bioluminescent crests. She wore the Academy's neutral gray uniform without modification, attended her classes with quiet diligence, and had thus far spent 8 months at Music Zenith without making any particular impression on anyone, which was exactly music how she liked it. Kira's daily routine had developed into a careful dance of avoidance and efficiency. Morning combat conditioning at 600, when most of the warrior caste students were still sleeping off whatever counted as recreational activities for species with regenerative livers. Breakfast at 7:20, grabbing something portable from the synthesizers and eating while music. Walking to her first class, diplomatic theory, xenocultural studies, conflict resolution frameworks. She absorbed it all with the focused intensity of someone who actually wanted to be there, who competed against 2,000 other applicants for her spot, who understood that this opportunity was ridiculously improbable for someone from a planet that had only achieved FTL capability 6 years ago. She kept her head down, her grades up, and her interactions professional. When warrior caste students' music strutted past her in the halls, she stepped aside. When they talked over her in seminars, music, she let them. When they took the training equipment she'd been waiting to use, she found something else. It wasn't cowardice, though plenty of people music assumed it was. It was simple mathematics. Fighting was inefficient, drew attention, and jeopardized her position at the academy. She'd grown up in the Detroit containment music zone back before the North American Confederation got its act together, and she'd learned early that survival music meant picking your battles with extreme prejudice. But even the most careful equation eventually introduces a variable you didn't account for. In Kira's case, that variable stood 7 ft tall, had blue-gray chitinous plating, 4 arms, ending in what could politely be called natural weapons, and an ego that required its own gravitational field. Vector Vaskorvex, second son of a distinguished military lineage, champion of the Academy's combat tournaments music for 3 consecutive cycles, and based on observable behavior, living proof that you could survive to adulthood without developing music anything resembling self-awareness or empathy. The Corvaxians were a proud species, which was a diplomatic way of saying they were absolutely convinced of their superiority music, and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Their homeworld music gravity was 1.7 times standard. They evolved from pack predators, and their culture treated combat prowess as the ultimate measure of worth. Vector embodied all of this with the subtlety of a supernova. He'd been at the Academy for 4 years, had accumulated enough disciplinary citations to wallpaper a small room, and remained enrolled primarily because his family donated generously to the Korvaxian Cultural Center, and because, technically, he hadn't permanently injured anyone important, his favorite pastime, aside from staring at his own reflection and practicing what he probably thought were intimidating poses, music was establishing dominance over anyone. He perceived music as weak, which in his assessment was essentially everyone who wasn't Korvaxian, but he showed particular interest in tormenting the species from low classification worlds, easy target, safe music targets, the kind of targets that wouldn't fight back, whose complaints would be dismissed as cultural misunderstandings, music who would eventually transfer out or graduate, leaving him free to find new music entertainment. He noticed Kira the way a bored predator notices movement in the brush, music, with casual interest that could quickly escalate into something more focused. Their first interaction, music, happened on a completely ordinary Thursday afternoon in the Academy's main concourse, that massive central hub where 6 different corridors intersected and students' music gathered between classes. Kira was heading to advanced negotiation tactics, walking with her characteristic efficiency, and GT, music, and GT, data pad in hand, completely absorbed, reviewing her notes on and GT, music, and GT, interest-based bargaining frameworks. She didn't see Vector step directly into her path, didn't have time to react before music collided with what felt like a very aggressive wall. Her data pad clattered to the floor, and GT, music, and GT, she stumbled back, caught her balance. Deathworld reflexes, though nobody music recognized them as such, and looked up at approximately 7 FT. Music of smug superiority. Watch your path, little thing. Vector music rumbled, his voice carrying across the concourse with the kind of volume that suggested he'd never had a music private conversation in his life. His mandibles clicked in what passed for Korvaxian amusement. Your species must be very fragile to be so easily displaced. Around them, conversations died. Students stopped walking. Everyone knew this script, had seen it performed dozens of times with different actors. Some species looked away, and GT, music, and GT, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others watched with barely concealed anticipation because, let's be honest, they were young and bored, and drama was drama. Kira bent down, retrieved, and GT, music, and GT, her data pad checked it for damage. Straightened, met Richthar's primary eyes. Korvaxians had 6 total, arranged in a pattern that probably meant something to evolutionary biologists, and kept her expression neutral. Apologies, she said, her voice level. I wasn't paying attention. The smart move. The de-escalating move. The move that every conflict resolution framework recommended when dealing music with aggression-based species. Richthar's mandibles clicked again. Faster this time. He leaned down, music, bringing his face closer to hers, close enough that she could smell whatever Korvaxians smelled like when they thought they were being music intimidated. Something like ozone and copper. You should learn your place, music. Human. Your kind are new to the concordance. Weak. Barely worth the resources spent on your training. He straightened, looked around at their audience playing to the crowd. Perhaps you should return to your death world before you embarrass yourself further. Kira felt something shift in her chest, a familiar sensation she'd been successfully suppressing for 8 months. The part of her that had grown up in the zones where showing weakness meant becoming a target, where respect was earned through very specific demonstrations, where sometimes the only language everyone understood was violence. She took a slow breath, reminded herself where she was, what she stood to lose. "I'll be more careful," she said, and stepped around him. His lower arm music shot out, blocking her path. "Did I dismiss you?" The concourse had gone completely silent. Now, even the translation matrices seemed to hum more quietly, as if the technology itself was holding its breath. Kira looked at the arm, then back at Richter, calculated approximately 47 different responses, their probabilities of success, their potential consequences. Rejected all but one. "Move your arm," she said quietly, "or I will move it for you. You won't like how I do it. This is your warning. The only one you get." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Richter's face. Confusion, maybe. The briefest flash of uncertainty. He'd been doing this for years, and the script didn't include this response. Targets were supposed to cower, apologize, scurry away with their dignity in tatters. Then the moment passed, and he threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh clicking sound, and several of his friends joined in. Because bullies always had friends, or at least people smart enough to pretend. "You move my arm." He laughed harder. "Oh, this is precious. The little death worlder has teeth." He looked around at the music crowd. "Did you all hear? She threatened me." More laughter. A few uncomfortable shuffles. One Thraxkai student recording the whole thing on his neural implant because of course. And GT, music. And GT, he was. Kira stood very still. When she spoke again, her voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I'm going to describe exactly what will happen if you don't move your arm in the next 3 seconds. I'm going to grab your wrist. And GT, music. And GT, you're using your lower right arm, so that's the weakest of your 4. Leverage-wise, I'm going to twist it counterclockwise. Music while stepping into your center mass. Your chitin plates overlap in a specific music pattern on your joints. I've been studying Corvaxian anatomy because unlike some people I actually pay attention in xenobiology. And there's a vulnerable point right there at your elbow equivalent, music. When I apply pressure, something is going to crack, it will hurt. You'll pull back, music, instinctively, which is when I'll sweep your primary legs. With your high center of gravity, you'll go down hard. The floor here is synthetic marble. It's going to hurt when you land on it. And then I'm going to walk to my class because I have better things to do than this. The concourse had achieved a level of silence usually reserved for vacuum exposure. Richter stared at her, processed what she'd said, then laughed even harder. "You're insane." He managed between clicks, completely insane. He pulled his arm back, not because she'd intimidated him. Oh no, his body language made that very clear. But because this was suddenly entertaining in a new way, music, I look forward to teaching you about reality. Very much. He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, gesturing for her to pass. Kira walked past him, her pace unchanged, and continued toward her class. Her heart rate, if anyone had been monitoring it, remained at a perfectly calm 68 beats per minute. Behind her, the concourse erupted in conversation, and Rickthar smiled, because he just found his new favorite toy. The thing about bullies, across species, across music cultures, across evolutionary backgrounds, is that they operate music on a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics. They mistake compliance for inability, avoidance for weakness, and patience for passivity. They'd never been the small one, the vulnerable one, the one who had to get creative about survival. They'd always been the predator, never the prey, and it left them with catastrophic blind music spots. Over the next 6 days, Rickthar made it his personal mission to demonstrate why Kira should have just cowered music like a sensible target. Day 1, he accidentally spilled his beverage on her in the cafeteria. Music. It was some kind of Corvaxian protein drink that smelled like fermented vegetables and stained synthetic fabric. A truly impressive shade of purple. Kira changed uniforms, said nothing, and filed an incident report that went precisely nowhere because the supervising administrator was from a culture that considered such conflicts character building. Day 2, he and 3 friends cornered her after advanced negotiation tactics, blocking the corridor and engaging in what they probably thought was witty banter about human fragility, Earth's embarrassing atmospheric composition, and whether her species had evolved from prey animals. Kira waited them out with the same expression someone might use while watching paint dry, then walked away when they got bored. Day 3, he accessed the training schedule and booked every time slot she'd requested for the next month. Petty, juvenile, and technically with academy regulations. Day 4, music. He started spreading rumors about why a human had really been admitted to Zenith. Must have been a diversity quota. Must have been political pressure from the Sol delegation. Certainly wasn't merit, because everyone knew humans were barely sentient. Days 5 and 6 brought increasingly aggressive shoulder checks in the corridors, jokes about her appearance in front of instructors who did nothing, and the kind of low-level harassment designed to wear down someone's psychological defenses until they either retaliated in a way music that would get them expelled or simply left. Kira adapted, changed her routes, adjusted her schedule, started carrying spare uniforms, music, documented everything with meticulous detail that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. And absolutely, music did not retaliate, despite the part of her brain, the Detroit Zones part, the survivor part, that kept offering increasingly creative solutions to music, the Rickthar problem. Because here's what Rickthar didn't understand, what his friends didn't understand, what most of the academy didn't understand. Kira wasn't avoiding conflict because she was afraid. She was avoiding it because she'd done the math, and the math said that the second she actually fought back, her academy career was over. Self-defense was theoretically protected under regulations, but theory and practice were different. Beasts, and she was music from a species with no political capital and no diplomatic leverage. She'd be made an example of. And GT, music. And GT, used to demonstrate that Earth's admittance had been premature. Sent home music with a black mark that would follow her forever. So she endured, adapted, survived, just like she always had. Until day 7, when Richter made a critical miscalculation. The combat training arena occupied the entire eastern wing of the Academy's ground floor, a massive space with variable gravity settings, multiple environmental zones, and enough safety protocols to make the insurance adjusters weep with relief. Students used it for everything from formal tournament matches to casual sparring, and the unspoken rule was that warriors got priority access while everyone else worked around their schedules. Kira had finally found an opening, 5:30, before most people were conscious, and was running through a basic conditioning routine. Nothing fancy. Calisthenics flexibility work, the kind of maintenance training that kept a body functional. She was alone, or thought music she was, which meant she dropped some of the careful control she usually maintained, was moving at her natural speed rather than the slower pace she adopted in public, which was how Richter, arriving early for his own training session, discovered that the human moved like music, nothing he'd ever seen before. She was fast, not quick for a human fast, actually fast, the kind of fast that suggested her nervous system processed information and executed responses at a rate that didn't match her species' reputation. She transitioned between exercises with fluid efficiency, and when she hit music, the heavy bag, designed to withstand blows from species significantly larger and stronger than humans, it actually swayed on its reinforced music chain. Richter watched from the entrance, mandibles clicking softly as he recalculated. Interesting. The little Deathworlder had been hiding more than attitude. This changed the entertainment value significantly. He entered the arena with 2 of his music friends, Torvik and Murkesh, both Korvaxian, both large enough to make architects reconsider their load-bearing music calculations. Their footsteps echoed across the space, deliberately heavy, announcing their presence like a drum roll. Kira stopped mid-routine, turned, assessed the situation with the kind of rapid threat evaluation that was pure muscle memory. 3 targets, all larger, all predator species, blocking the only exit. No weapons, Academy regulations, but Korvaxians had natural weapons in abundance. No witnesses. Arena's privacy protocols meant the monitoring systems would be in passive mode, recording but not alerting anyone, unless someone triggered a medical emergency beacon. The math had just changed significantly. Training early human. Richter approached with studied casualness, his friends flanking him in a pattern that was absolutely intentional. Pack tactics, instinctive cooperation. How dedicated, how admirable. Kira grabbed her towel, wiped sweat from her face, and started toward her bag. I was just finishing. No. Richter moved to intercept, positioning himself between her and the exit. Stay, I insist. We should train together. After all, your species claims to come from a death world. Class 12, if I recall correctly. I'm curious about what that means in practice. His friends spread out, casually cutting off alternate escape routes. They were enjoying this, their body language radiating music. Anticipation. Kira stopped, considered her options, realized there weren't many good ones. I don't want to fight you, she said, and meant it. Not because she music was afraid that would come later, maybe, when the adrenaline wore off, but because she genuinely understood music, the consequences. Of course you don't. Richthar's mandibles clicked in. Amusement, music. Because you're weak. Because despite all your talk, all your threats, and GT, music. And GT, you're just another primitive from a backwater world pretending to belong among your betters. He reached out, not his lower arm this time. And GT, music. And GT, but his primary right, the strongest one, and shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to move her back several music steps, to demonstrate the disparity in their mass and power. So here's what's going to happen. He continued, advancing as she retreated. You're going to issue a formal challenge, right here, right now, with my friends. As witnesses, we're going to have a sanctioned match. And when I'm done with you, when you're in the medical center explaining to the administrators how you overestimated your abilities, maybe then you'll transfer somewhere more appropriate for your skill level. Maybe a nice safe school for species from nice safe planets. He shoved her again, harder this time. Kira's back hit the wall, literally and figuratively. Final chance, she said, and her voice had dropped into a register that should have triggered every survival instinct Richthar possessed, if he'd had any that weren't atrophied from disuse. Walk away. You, your friends, just leave. I don't want to hurt you. Richthar laughed, Torvik laughed. Murkesh laughed, hilarious. The human thought she could hurt them. Then Richthar made his terminal mistake. He didn't just music, invade her space. He grabbed her, primary and secondary hands on her shoulders, lifting her slightly, pinning her against the wall in a display of dominance that his species probably music considered mild, but that crossed every line that mattered. Issue the challenge. Kira looked at the hands on her shoulders, looked at Torvik, music, and Murkesh, who were watching with gleeful anticipation, looked at Richthar's face, so close to hers, radiating absolute confidence in his superiority. Then something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. Okay, she said softly. I, Kira Chen of Earth, issue a formal challenge to Richthar Vas. Korvax, music, combat rules, academy standard, protocols. Do you accept? Richthar's mandibles spread in a predatory grin. I accept. He released her, stepped back, giving her space to move to the center music of the arena. Torvik was already activating the official recording protocols. And GT, music. And GT, logging the challenge in the academy system. Everything legal, everything documented. Everything exactly music how it was supposed to be. They faced each other across the arena floor, Richthar rolling his shoulders and flexing all four arms in a display that would have intimidated pretty much anyone. Kira just stood there, breathing steadily, her expression neutral. Try not to cry too much when this is over, Rickthar suggested. It's undignified. The arena system chimed, indicating the match was active. Sanctioned. Official. Rickthar charged. He covered the distance fast. Korvaxians were sprinters, evolved to close with prey before it could escape. And his technique was solid. 4 arms meant 4 attack angles, and he used them all. A combination of strikes and grapples, designed to overwhelm an opponent's defenses through sheer volume. Kira wasn't there when the attacks arrived. She'd moved, not away but laterally, sliding past his rush with a minimal waste of motion that spoke of serious training, of muscle memory built through repetition and refinement. Rickthar's music, momentum carried him past her, and she let him go. Didn't capitalize on the opening. He spun, mandibles clicking in. Irritation. Stop running. I'm not running, she said reasonably. Music. I'm here. He charged again, adjusted his approach. Tried to corral her against the wall. Same result. She flowed around his attacks like water, never quite where he expected. Never quite within reach. It should have been impossible. He was faster, stronger, larger. But somehow it kept happening. Torvik and Murkesh music exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to script. Stand still and fight. Rickthar's music, voice carried genuine frustration now. He'd landed exactly 0 hits despite the significant advantages in reach and power. No, Kira said, and there was something in her tone. Music that finally registered as a warning to the Korvaxians watching. She stopped retreating. Rickthar caught in the momentum of his own attack. And GT, music. And GT suddenly found her inside his guard. Found her hands on his lower right wrist. And GT, music. And GT, exactly where she'd specified days ago. In the concourse. Found her stepping into his center mass, while twisting his arm counterclockwise. Leverage, physics, biomechanics. The kind of principles that worked, regardless of species. His chitin plating, which had evolved to protect against the slashing attacks and crushing bites of his homeworld's music. Predators. Wasn't designed for the specific rotational force she applied to his joint. Something in his arm made a sound like cracking ice. Rickthar roared pain and shock and outrage and tried to pull back. Instinctively, exactly as she'd predicted. His own strength worked against him. She didn't resist his retreat. She used it, adding her own force to his, converting his backward momentum into downward motion while sweeping his forward legs. 7 FT of Korvaxian warrior hit the arena floor with a sound that echoed music off the walls. The impact stunned him. Not seriously injured, but thoroughly disoriented. He tried to push himself up. Found Kira music standing over him. Found her foot positioned precisely over his thorax where the chitin plates separated to allow for flexibility. Stay down, she advised. This is over. Ricksthar's pride music, already wounded, refused to accept this reality. He lunged upward, trying to grab her leg, trying to use his superior mass to drag music her down. Big mistake. Kira shifted her weight. And GT, music. And GT used his own grab as an anchor point and delivered a precisely measured strike to the nerve cluster she'd identified in her xenobiology studies. Not the thorax that was protected, but the softer tissue around his secondary shoulder joint, where Corvaxian neurological pathways ran close to the surface. His right side music went numb. Just temporary, just a few minutes. But it felt like his entire arm had been deleted from existence. She stepped back, giving him space, waiting to see if he'd learned anything. He hadn't. Rickstar music pushed himself up with his remaining functional arms, mandibles, spread in a snarl and came at her with everything he had left. No technique music, now no strategy. Just fury and humiliation driving him forward. And Kira, who had been holding back, who had been trying to end this with minimal damage, finally stopped pulling her punches. The fight lasted another 43 seconds. She broke his guard with a feint that left him overextended, struck his primary knee joint not to destroy it, just to destabilize, and used his falling weight to drive him into the floor again. When he tried to rise, she caught his primary arm, hyperextended the elbow, and applied just enough pressure to make him feel exactly how easy it would be to snap. Yield, she said quietly. Never, he gasped, because he was Corvaxian, and Corvaxians didn't yield music to prey species, didn't yield to Deathworlders, didn't yield to anything smaller than themselves. So she showed him the alternative. She released his arm, circled behind him, faster than he could track, and locked her arms around his neck in a rear chokehold that cut off blood flow. Music to his brain without crushing his windpipe. Clean, efficient, the kind of technique that ended fights without causing permanent damage if you knew what you were doing. Music. And Kira, raised in the Detroit zones where self-defense wasn't theoretical, absolutely knew what music she was doing. Yield, she repeated, or sleep. Your choice. Rickstar struggled, pushed against her grip with 3 functional arms, tried to stand, to throw her off, to do anything music that might break the hold. But leverage didn't care about strength, and she had gravity and geometry on her side. His vision started music tunneling. His movements became uncoordinated. Somewhere in his rapidly oxygen-deprived brain, survival instinct music finally overrode pride. He tapped her arm 3 times, the universal signal for submission. Kira released him immediately. Music stepped back and waited while he collapsed forward, gasping and coughing as blood flow returned to his brain. The arena was silent except for the sound of Rickstar's labored breathing. Torvik and Marrakesh stood frozen there, mandibles hanging open in expressions that translated roughly to what the actual hell just happened. Kira walked over to her bag, pulled out her water bottle, took a long drink. Her heart rate, if anyone had been monitoring, was elevated, but not dangerously so. 112 music beats per minute. Manageable. She wasn't even breathing particularly hard. The match is over, she said, her voice carrying across the arena. Rickstar Vas Korvac submitted. It's recorded, it's official. She looked at Torvik. You should probably help your friend too. Medical music. She shouldered her bag and walked toward the exit. What are you? Rickstar's voice stopped her. He'd managed to push himself into a sitting position, was staring at her with something that might have been fear, if his species admitted to experiencing that emotion. Kira turned back, considered the question, considered everything it represented. The assumptions about humans, about Deathworlds, about what strength actually meant when you stripped music away, the ego and posturing. I'm from a planet where the weather tries to kill you, she said conversationally, where the microorganisms are aggressive enough to be classified as hostile, where the apex music predators evolved alongside us and still occasionally eat people, where we built cities anyway and called it civilization, where gravity music is one standard, which means my bones are denser than yours, my muscles are more efficient, and my cardiovascular system is over-engineered for an environment that's trying to crush me at all times. She paused. And I'm one of the weaker members of my species. I'm a diplomat, Rickstar. I sit at desks and read reports. The actual soldiers from my world. The ones who train for combat instead of conflict resolution. You don't want to meet them. She adjusted her bag strap. I warned you once. Told you exactly what would happen. You laughed. A slight smile. That was your mistake. Not fighting me was inevitable music once you made this personal. Your mistake was not listening. This isn't over. Rickstar managed, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. My family, your family will review the official recording and see that you issued a challenge against someone from a class 12 Deathworld after multiple documented instances of harassment, and that you lost. Kira's voice was gentle, almost kind. They'll be disappointed. Music probably might affect your standing, but that's not my problem. You made your choices. She walked to the door, paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I really didn't want this. I came here to learn, to build music, bridges between species, to be part of something bigger than border disputes and resource conflicts. You could have just left me alone. Then she left, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss. In the arena, Rickstar stayed sitting on the floor, his body aching from a dozen points of contact, his pride shattered more thoroughly than any physical injury could manage. Torvik and Marrakesh slowly approached, careful as if sudden movements might trigger some predator response. Did that actually happen? Marrakesh whispered. Shut up. Rickstar said, help me to medical. Music. The news spread through Zenith Academy at approximately the speed of light, which was fitting since most of the student body was already obsessively connected to the communications music network. By lunch, everyone knew. By dinner, everyone had seen the recording somehow leaked, though officially it was supposed to be restricted music to administrative review. By the next morning, the story had reached the kind of music legendary status usually reserved for historical battles or catastrophic scandals. The human, the quiet, unremarkable human who'd spent 8 music months being invisible, had taken down Rekthar Voskorvax in under 3 music minutes. Not through luck, not through some technical loophole, through superior skill. And GT, music. And GT, better tactics. And the kind of bone-deep competence that came from growing up in an environment that made the music Academy's combat courses look like recreational activities. The warrior caste students reviewed the footage obsessively, analyzing every move, trying to identify where Rekthar had gone wrong, as if there was some secret technique they could train to counteract. The moderate students watched with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction that a bully had faced consequences, concern about what it meant for human integration into the concordance. The lower-tier students just stayed very, very quiet, because drawing attention during a power structure reorganization was historically a bad idea. The faculty convened emergency meetings about proper protocols and whether the fight should have been allowed to proceed. Ultimately, they concluded that everything had been conducted according to regulations. Challenge issued, challenge accepted. Proper documentation, immediate. Cessation upon submission. No violations. No grounds for punishment. Just a very embarrassing loss for a student who'd built his entire identity on martial superiority. Rekthar spent 3 days in medical, more for psychological evaluation than physical treatment. His injuries were minor, would heal completely, but his social standing had been amputated. Other Korvaxian students avoided him. His friends found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. His family sent a terse message, music about responsibility and honor, which in Korvaxian culture was roughly equivalent to being music disowned. And Kira returned to her routine as if nothing had happened. Showed up to classes on time, completed her assignments with characteristic thoroughness, continued her early morning training sessions in the now empty arena because everyone else had suddenly remembered they had other things to do. But the isolation music had changed character. Before, people had ignored her. Now they watched music her. Not with respect exactly. Respect would have required admitting they'd been wrong about humans, about Deathworlders. Music, about the whole social hierarchy they'd constructed, but with wary awareness. The kind of attention prey animals give to predators they can't quite classify. Music. Students stepped aside when she walked past, giving her wide berth. Professors called on her carefully, as if she might suddenly demonstrate another unexpected capability. The warrior caste students, the ones who'd been so confident about the natural order of things, found themselves recalculating their assumptions about strength and dominance, and what those terms actually meant. 3 weeks after the fight, Kira sat alone in the cafeteria. Alone had become her default state, reviewing notes for an upcoming examination when someone approached her table. She looked up, prepared for another confrontation, and found a 3 Sci student she vaguely recognized from diplomatic music theory. "May I ask a question?" The student said, hesitant. "Sure. Why didn't you lead with that? The fighting capability, I mean. When you first arrived, everyone would have respected you." Kira considered her answer carefully. Because respect earned through fear isn't respect. It's just fear with a polite label. I didn't come here to intimidate anyone. I came here to learn, to understand, to help build something better than borders, music, and barriers, and this entire system where might makes right. She gestured around the cafeteria at the self-segregated species clusters, the hierarchical seating arrangements, the whole toxic structure. This isn't better. It's just the old patterns with better music technology. The HFY student nodded slowly. And now everyone thinks I'm dangerous instead of weak. Different label, same isolation, same failure. Kira closed her data pad. I gave him a warning, one warning, very specific, completely clear. He laughed. That's what bothers me most. Not the fight, not the consequences, but the fact that he heard me describe exactly what would happen, music, and still didn't believe me. Still thought his assumptions about my species were more accurate than my actual music words. She stood, gathered her materials. That's the real problem at this academy, maybe in music the whole concordance. People would rather trust their prejudices than listen to what someone's actually telling them. She walked away, leaving the HFY student standing there with an expression that suggested serious recalibration of worldview. And the academy, that gleaming monument to interstellar cooperation and understanding, continued its daily operations with one significant change. Everyone now understood that. And GT, music. And GT, humans. Those weird Deathworlders from that backwater planet in the Sol system maybe shouldn't be underestimated. That may be a warning from someone who'd survived on a Class 12 world, where the atmosphere was corrosive, where the megafauna could crush you, where the microorganisms could dissolve you, where the weather could flash freeze or superheat you depending on the season, was worth music taking seriously. That maybe, just maybe, quiet didn't mean music weak, and peace-seeking didn't mean incapable. Rekthar learned this lesson the hard way. He withdrew from the academy 2 months later, citing family obligation. Everyone knew the real reason. Last anyone heard, he joined a colony defense force on some outer rim world, where the hierarchies were clearer and nobody knew about his humiliation. Kira graduated 18 months later with honors, top 5% of her music class, and accepted a position with the Concordance Diplomatic Corps. She specialized in conflict resolution between warrior music caste species and civilian populations. Turned out to be brilliant at it. Apparently had insights about violence and its alternatives that came from actually understanding both. Sometimes her colleagues would ask about the incident with Rekthar. She'd smile a small, tired smile and say the same thing every time. I warned him once, that's all anyone gets. And really, what more needed to be said? The galaxy was a big place, full of species that had evolved under different conditions, music, developed different cultures, built different civilizations. Some grew up on garden worlds where cooperation was natural. Some evolved on Deathworld's music, where survival required adaptability and resilience, and the kind of grim determination that looked like weakness right up until it didn't. The Concordance was still learning to accommodate that diversity, still learning that strength came in different packages, still learning to listen when someone gave a warning, no matter how improbable their appearance suggested their capabilities might be. It was a slow process, messy, Imperfect, but that's how peace was built. One conversation, one challenged. Assumption, one avoided fight at a time. And occasionally, when avoidance failed, one very specific music demonstration. That yes, the quiet person from the death world absolutely knew what they were talking. Music about, and yes, you should have listened the first time. Rekthar had laughed, then vanished in smoke, metaphorically speaking, though his reputation had definitely music evaporated. These things happened. The universe had a way of teaching lessons to those who refused to learn them willingly. Kira hoped the lesson stuck for everyone involved, but she wasn't holding her breath. People were predictable that way.